Again, you talked about NDAs. I am bound by an NDA at Fox News. If I were not bound by an NDA and if Fox News wanted to release me from that NDA, I could tell you about my time with Pete Hegseth. Unfortunately, that's not possible. But I will say that the reason that there are so many people who anonymously came forward at Fox News is that because they're also bound by confidentiality provisions, which 1/3 of all American workers need to sign on their first day of work. And if they were to go public, they could get sued.
Piers Morgan had a panel of people on, a couple of right-wing nut jobs and a couple of non-right-wing nut jobs to talk about Pete Hegseth, among other things. In this video, I'm going to focus on their conversation, the first part of their conversation about Pete Hegseth and the ongoing confirmation hearings around him. And, it's what it is. I'm certainly going to have thoughts along the way, and then I want to know what you think in the comments, but let's check out the first part of this together.
Okay, well, welcome to all of you. A stellar panel, if I may say so, and Happy New Year to you all. Let me start with Dave Rubin. I watched most of Pete Hegseth's stuff yesterday, and all I kept thinking to myself, I've got a lot of military in my family. My brother was a British Army colonel. My sister married a British Army colonel. My grandfather was a decorated commando. My great uncle was a decorated war hero, and so on. So I watched with great interest, thinking one thing. If I was in the US military, would I feel good or bad about what I heard from Pete Hegseth? And I concluded I'd be pretty happy that I had a guy there who not only had served his country for a long period with great personal courage himself, but seemed to really understand what is required from a military, and also seemed to pride actual meritocracy over mediocrity or virtue signaling or box ticking or DEI or any of these things. And I thought, yeah, if I'm in the US military, I think I'd probably like this guy being at the top of the pyramid. What did you think?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I can speak as someone that's on this side of the pond, that I have friends and family in the military, and they're happy about this too. There's two things going on with Hegseth here, despite the, I would say, hysterical virtue signaling of some of the senators that you just showed there. The things are that he's qualified. There's very little question about his qualifications. But the other thing that I think is really allowing him to shine right now is his decade-plus time at Fox News, where he is able, as a TV presenter, that's what he's been, and a talk show host, he's able to communicate these ideas clearly. When he went out of his way to talk about equality and not equity, and that we should have meritocracy and it's qualifications that should matter, these are all of the important things that we need to reintegrate, not only into the military in America, very obviously, instead of lowering our standards and caring about skin color and genitals and sexuality, but we need to reintegrate it across all of our institutions. That's the work for the broader Trump administration.
These clowns are good at sounding reasonable. But first of all, the people that have held that position are not unqualified, right? He talks about Pete Hegseth being qualified. There's nothing that qualifies him from doing it other than the fact that he served, right? He's never been in a leadership position like this. And being a Fox News host, I suppose we're moving into a media-saturated thing. His primary qualification for this nomination is the fact that he is a die-hard loyalist. He will do whatever Donald Trump wants him to do, and that is the single qualifying factor that has put him in that seat.
But I think Hegseth, well, we also know he's going to pass. I mean, Thune, who's the majority leader, has already said it. I mean, it's basically a done deal already. But I think he's going to reform the military very quickly. And I think we're going to get back to having a functioning military that people can be proud of, rather than counting, how many lesbian generals that wear dog collars we have. As important as that is, Michael Knowles.
Why are you pointing at me? Hold on. Wait.
I'm not going to bring that allegation to the fore before we have a Senate inquiry. Let me go to Wajahat. Wajahat, I mean, I've heard the criticisms about Pete Hegseth. I know him a bit from when I've done stuff on Fox. He's always been perfectly good to me, and always, I thought, a very good performer on television. But I also thought that under fire yesterday, and some of it got a bit personal and ferocious, he conducted himself calmly. He seemed very well informed. He clearly has some opinions about the military which others may not share. But I certainly didn't get a feeling of somebody out of his depth. And when you actually look at people who've held that job in the past, yes, some have been generals, but they can be pretty intransigent sometimes in their view about how things should be. And some have not been generals and are eminently less qualified than Pete Hegseth. So what was your view?
Look, I know that Republicans actually like affirmative action because they're perfectly fine with mediocre MAGA men and lowering the standards to the point where Pete Hegseth, the Fox News host, can slither under it and be the Secretary of Defense. For people who don't know, the Secretary of Defense overlooks a budget of over $900 billion, 3 million people. He is responsible in particular for defense policymaking. We're talking about law and order, national security. You're going to give it to Pete Hegseth, a man who was in the National Army Guard. His fellow colleague in the Guard looked at his tattoos and actually reported him to be an insider threat because it was so extreme. This is a man who wrote a book called American Crusade. In his book, Pete Hegseth said, I am too extreme for the U.S. military. In his book, Pete Hegseth said, I support these militias, these paramilitary forces. In his book, he calls the enemies liberals extremists. So much for unity. This is a man, not just adultery, but sexual impropriety. He has been alleged of sexual impropriety and sexual assault. If he has nothing to hide, release the woman that he has signed to an NDA and paid off. Let her tell her story. This is a man whose own mother sent one of the most damning emails I have ever heard and read in my life. If your mother sends the email that Pete Hegseth's mother said you have failed in life, accusing him of being a sexual abuser, a man whose own Fox colleagues have said, allegedly in the New York Times, that they're worried about his alcoholism and alcohol problem, and a man who has economic impropriety allegations. He was released from 2 nonprofits. What are we doing here, Piers? Listen, with Marco Rubio, I disagree with him. You don't see me here complaining. Qualified guy, intelligent guy, Secretary of State, fine. Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense, what are we doing? You guys are putting lipsticks on a pig and you're making America less safe. And the right wing in MAGA is doing this for Pete Hegseth.
Okay.
You're making this country less safe just because you're bending the knee to Donald Trump and he wants a lapdog who, by the way, I'll agree with Dave on this, who's good on TV.
Okay.
So that's what we're going to do. We're going to trade our national security for Pete Hegseth.
Okay.
Release the woman from the NDA. I want to hear from the woman. Secretary of Defense, let's defend women for Pete Hegseth. You made your point. That's my take.
You made your point. Any negatives while we're at it?
I don't have a cricket sound effect, but I would put them in here if I did.
He works
out. It was a joke. It was a joke, Wajahat. It was a joke. It was a joke. You haven't actually taken that seriously. Let me bring Michael in here. I mean, look, a whole litany of stuff there, almost all of which was put to Pete Hegseth. I thought he actually batted away all of that stuff. We got a clip actually of him batting away one. Let's take a look.
All they were out to do, Mr. Chairman, was to destroy me. And why do they want to destroy me? Because I'm a change agent and a threat to them, because Donald Trump was willing to choose me, to empower me, to bring the Defense Department back to what it really should be, which is warfighting. So I'm willing to endure these attacks. But what I will do is stand up for the truth and for my reputation. False attacks, anonymous attacks, repeated ad nauseum, printed as nauseum, as facts. We have provided to the committee, Mr. Chairman, and I know you're going to share, on the record statement after on the record statement from people who have served with me, worked with me at Fox News, Concerned Vets, Vets for Freedom, you name it, from the top of the chain to the bottom, who will say I treat them with respect, with kindness, with dignity. That's men, that's women, that's black, that's white, that's every background. I have prided myself as a leader of respecting people, being professional.
Now, just before we move on from there, I want you to watch that clip, tune into your BS meter, and you tell me, would you hire this guy in your small business? Do you believe him? Like, I have personal feelings about it, but I just listened to that guy talk about how there's all these anonymous attacks designed to bring him down, and my BS meter is just screaming, red light flashing, lie, 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 lie. Just apply that. Strip away the politics and just look at it for what it is. He's full of crap.
Michael, I thought that was quite an effective response, really, because a lot of it is just innuendo, hearsay, unsubstantiated allegation. Other stuff has been settled, as Wajahat says. That's not uncommon in America. It's incredibly common for people to do NDA settlements or whatever with no blame or liability attached.
It's not incredibly common. It's incredibly common on the right because nowadays all of them have got these allegations against them.
Where do you sit with this? I mean, it looks like Hegseth is going to get...
I don't know about you. That's not common.
Sorry?
Thank you.
That's not common, not for me. I don't know about you, but that's not common.
I'm not saying for you or me.
There's a police report where I sexually assaulted a woman and I signed her to an NDA. In America,
that kind of settlement is not uncommon, is my point. Just generally, in the American system, a lot of things get settled that way without any admission of liability or wrongdoing, which is the case with Pete Hegseth. Michael, where do you sit with this?
Well, so much of what Wajahat just said is not true, or as you point out, Piers, is completely unsubstantiated, like the allegations that Pete Hegseth shows up drunk to work. Excuse me one second, Wajahat. I've been on that morning show with Pete a number of times. I've been in studio with him a number of times. The only thing you could accuse Pete of is being too alert and energetic. I found it overwhelming, actually, while I was there, tired, trying to dust the sand out of my eyes. But you suggest that the graduate of Princeton and Harvard, who for decades has been in the U.S. military, served his country honorably, that he's somehow unqualified to work at the Pentagon. The most egregious accusation you make against him, though, is that he's an extremist because he has a tattoo. Could you tell us what the tattoo is?
The tattoos specifically, I did not make the allegation that he's an extremist. It was actually
you
his
repeated the
fellow
allegation.
colleague
So what's
who
the
called
tattoo?
him as an insider threat.
Yeah, right. So what's the tattoo?
I can tell you. It says
it was his fellow colleague.
Let Wajahat answer, because Wajahat raised the tattoo.
Go ahead.
Wajahat, it's a fair question. What is this tattoo that you're so upset about?
It was his colleague. Wait. Two things.
Wajahat, hang on. Simple question. What is this tattoo that you're so upset about?
I wasn't the one upset about it. I was talking about his fellow colleague. This is exactly what I said. His fellow colleague.
Do you know what it was?
In the U.S. Army, called him out as a potential insider threat.
Well, what is the tattoo?
The tattoos on his chest.
What is the tattoo?
Also, I called him an extreme.
He did answer, but you were too busy talking over him.
Based upon his own book. Read the book,
What
American
is the
Crusade,
tattoo?
his own words.
If you don't know what the tattoo is, just admit it.
Oh, my Lord. Listen,
would you like to tell you what the tattoo is?
I want to, wait.
No, I'm genuinely intrigued. Do you know what it is or not,
We got a
Wajahat?
panelist.
Wajahat, do you know what it is or not?
She hasn't spoken yet. A woman hasn't spoken yet.
She's going to come. She's going to answer the question you're not answering. Final question to you, Wajahat.
I did answer it, but
final chance.
I got my colleague right here.
Be honest, Wajahat. Do you actually know what that tattoo is or not?
Listen, what I do know is I read his book, and in his book, if you read it, called American Crusade, in his book, wait a second.
Be honest.
His book.
Be honest.
I am. Look,
ironically,
you guys are putting lipstick on a pig,
no one's going to crucify you
bending
if you don't know the
Donald
answer.
Trump,
but do you know the answer?
Putting our national security at risk for Pete Hegseth. I'm telling you everything, and you guys are finding ways to spin. Why are you guys okay with a man who has an NDA with a woman that he allegedly sexually assaulted?
Do you know what the tattoo is that you got so upset about?
It was his colleague.
This is something that the right will frequently do, and the left gets caught in. He did talk about it. He simply hasn't repeated it. It's Deus Vot. But again, it's not about the tattoo. It's not about a tattoo, right? The tattoo is one data point in a larger picture. In the NDA, it's not necessarily just about the NDA, but it all does add up to the fact that this guy is a sycophant who has said radical things and whose own colleagues have said they don't think he's fit for this, right? Marco Rubio is another example. I don't think Marco Rubio is going to do a good job. I think he's radical in his own way, but he also doesn't have some of the troubling data points, right? It's
called him out as an insider threat, not me. His colleague. And I also said, go to his book, read his words.
But just to be clear, Wajahat,
you've got Pete stuff. I'm from the U.S. military. Pete Hegseth's own words. Why are you okay with that, Michael?
Wajahat, you don't know,
Michael, why are you guys okay with that?
You don't know,
literally in his book, American Crusade, he says he's too extreme for the U.S. military.
You don't know, do you?
Oh my gosh! All right, let's look it up right now.
I'd also love to know the names of some of the Fox colleagues.
Don't look it up. Let's go back to Michael. Michael, hang on, Michael. We gave him this chance. He obviously has no idea. Michael, what is the answer?
This falls along a threat as an insider threat.
I've gone back to Michael now.
2021 pegged Pete Hegseth as a potential insider.
You had 98 chances to answer, and you failed the test. Sorry, I'm going to Michael. I'm going to Michael. Don't talk over each other. Michael.
The tattoo in question is called a Jerusalem cross. That this is a medieval Christian symbol, goes back a long time. In fact, at Jimmy Carter's funeral, there was a Jerusalem cross on the floor of the cathedral, and on the program for the funeral, there's one other tattoo that some have suggested could be extremist. It's the phrase Deus Vult, which is a medieval Christian slogan, a long traditional slogan that refers to God's will, and it goes back a long way. These are very traditional, very mainstream Christian symbols.
Sure, I have 4 of it myself, and as a traditional Christian dude.
That not only are not extreme in any way, but which even the people who want to accuse him of extremism couldn't possibly name. That is
smug sneering.
Pathetic.
All right.
My
No, not
director
really.
has
His
that
insider
tattoo.
guardsman did it, which is what I said. And also I said that he called himself too extreme for the U.S. military in his book. That's pathetic.
Okay.
So is Pete Hegseth lying that he's too extreme in his book?
Let me
Michael
go
and
to
Dave?
Julie. He's been waiting.
He's too extreme for radical leftists.
Let me go to Julie.
Is he
Let me
lying?
go to Julie.
He said it. Is he lying?
Be gentlemanly, please. We have a lady who's not spoken. Julie, been waiting very patiently. Your view of this? I'll tell you
Well,
what, before
first
you
and foremost,
answer,
I would say-
I know you said in your Substack about this, under normal circumstances, Pete Hegseth, would be precluded from serving in any leadership role. So explain why you said that.
Well, I will explain in 1 second. Let me go back to something that was said in the very beginning, that he spent more than 10 years at Fox News, and that's what qualifies him to be in this position that he wants to be in. I spent more than 10 years at Fox News. I don't think I'm qualified to run the DOD whatsoever based on my time at Fox News.
I said that was one of the things.
If you, well, I don't think that's even a remote qualification. That's one.
Being able to
Two,
communicate
if you're
ideas
asking-
as the Secretary of Defense and explain policy.
Yeah, but previous SecDefs haven't had any trouble conveying, right? It's not like the trouble with the usual Secretary of Defense is they don't know how to communicate ideas.
It's actually a very big part of the job.
There are plenty of qualified Republicans out there who can run the DOD, who also are good on television. It does not need to be Pete Hegseth. Secondly, again, you talked about NDAs. I am bound by an NDA at Fox News. If I were not bound by an NDA and if Fox News wanted to release me from that NDA, I could tell you about my time with Pete Hegseth. Unfortunately, that's not possible. But I will say that the reason that there are so many people who anonymously came forward at Fox News is that because they're also bound by confidentiality provisions, which 1/3 of all American workers need to sign on their first day of work. And if they were to go public, they could get sued. The reason this accuser is not heard from is because, according to the New Yorker, she tried desperately to meet with Joni Ernst on the committee, and Joni Ernst turned her down. So the reason that she has not been able to come out publicly is because she has an NDA, and even privately, she could not meet with a senator on this committee who's also a rape survivor to share her story, because that rape survivor did not want to hear from a woman who was going to put her potentially in a position to vote against Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth has written himself while at Princeton, saying that women who are passed out, if you have sex with them while they're unconscious, that's not really rape. Right? Now, the American military has a tremendous sexual assault problem. A horrible sexual assault problem. I have spoken to women in the military who say on deployment, it's not a question of if, but a question of when they will be sexually assaulted. You cannot possibly have somebody running our military who has said that women who are unconscious deserve to be raped because it's not really rape. You can just go have your way with them. So I don't know which soldiers you've been talking to who think Pete Hegseth is a great thing for the military. There's not one woman out there who cares about being assaulted on deployment who thinks that this is the person that needs to be in charge of the United States military. And as for the cross that you talked about, yes, Deus Vult, which is the cross that he has, and the slogan that he has,
Deus Vult is a
an old Christian cross. The phrase, however, was uttered by crusaders as they were slaughtering Jews and Muslims during the Second Crusade specifically. So it's not just a random cross. It's not just a random phrase.
That isn't true. The phrase that isn't
not true.
It is true. The phrase was uttered after the Council of Clermont, when Pope Urban II declared the crusade, and it was actually probably Dieu le veut, but it's been rendered.
Again, it's not about the cross. She makes the point about Hegseth's stance, and I think if anything, people in this context on the left tend to overstate the case a little bit, right? I mean, it's not that Pete Hegseth thinks unconscious women deserve to be raped, right? That's the wrong choice of word. But the fact that he considers that not to be rape is the crux of the problem. And I think she stated the case the best. But I want to know what you think of the comments.